20-year-old girl who was interested in equestrian sport went on a bike to the stables to visit her horse. She never reached the place. She was found barely alive in a wooded area, after which the girl died. The police had no evidence, and this case stretched for years. A few decades later, investigators reopened and discovered a tiny clue that eventually revealed the truth. Loomis was born in 1944 in a suburb of Seattle called Mill Creek. From an early age, she became fond of horses and soon began riding. She was also seriously interested in drawing and even painted the walls of her room with drawings of horses. After graduating from high school, Jody planned to train as a nurse. She also began actively helping the wounded horses by tending them in the local stables. The girl did not imagine her life without these animals and tried to spend as much time with them as possible. Jody lived with her parents and younger sister. In 1972, when she was 20, she had a fiancé named Jim. Soon they were going to get married. Until then, they lived in her parents' house. On August 23 of that year, Jody decided to drive to the stables to visit the horses. Her father usually gave her a lift, but he was busy that day. The girl decided to get there by bicycle and left the house in the afternoon. Even though Jody was already an adult, her mother was still worried about her, and she asked not to linger until dark. She gave her some change to call home from a payphone if necessary. Time was running out, and the girl was still gone. Her parents began to worry deeply, and by nightfall, their anxiety turned into panic. Jody should have come back a long time ago, or at least contacted them via a payphone. At some point, the relatives decided to go to the police. They called 911, told about the disappearance of their daughter, and began to wait for the officers who were supposed to come to draft a statement. However, at about 11 p.m., police knocked on their door to give the family some shocking news. Jody was found barely alive on the street, but died on the way to the hospital. Her mother fell to the floor. Father could not utter a word while in shock. Experts had determined that Jody suffered several serious injuries, as well as a bullet wound in the area of the head. The perpetrator also abused the girl. He then left her in the trees near the road she was to take to the stables. The detective was told that Jody never made it to her destination. After interviewing residents, they reconstructed the approximate chronology of events. Immediately after leaving the house, the girl went to her friend and neighbor to call her and ride with her. But she was busy, and Jody went on. She passed an apple girl at the end of the street. The girl was never seen again until around 5:30 p.m., when she was discovered in a wooded area near the road. A man and a woman were passing by and noticed something strange near the fallen tree. They stopped and came closer, seeing Jody barely alive there. She was covered in blood, but she was still breathing. The girl was missing almost all clothes. The driver first thought of driving to the nearest payphone and calling the ambulance, but eventually he decided to take the girl to the hospital himself, as it was faster. Her injuries looked too bad, so every minute counted. Although he managed to get Jody to the nearest hospital in 15 minutes, she died on the way. Immediately afterwards, the police joined the case. After talking to the people who were taking the girl to the hospital, they went to the place where she was found, hoping to find some evidence. Jody's bike was about 50 yards away. The investigators also learned that she had brought a bridle for the horse from the house, but they never found it. According to the people who found the girl, she was only wearing shoes and underwear. The rest of the clothes were found near this place and handed over to the experts, but it did not give any leads. In addition, an empty casing was found at the murder scene. However, this evidence could not help to find the culprit. The detectives had absolutely no leads, so they started working every angle. The first thing they did was check out Jody's fiancé, but the young man had an unconditional alibi. By a very terrible coincidence, he was working at the very hospital where the girl was taken. His colleagues confirmed that he was on duty that day and did not leave the building. After that, investigators decided to check out the family who owned the piece of woodland where Jody was found. At this point, the detectives had no clues, and this case was frozen for years. The police were trying to find witnesses who might have seen a suspicious man on the day of the murder near that area. But here too they failed. Over the next 36 years, the investigation of this case has made no progress until it was handed over to the Unsolved Homicide Unit in 2008. The first thing the detectives discovered was that over the past decades, almost all the important evidence from the vault had disappeared. They couldn't find the bullet that killed Jodi, her underwear, and the biosamples from the victim's body. It was assumed that the other cops accidentally sent this evidence for analysis, mistaking Jodi's case for a similar murder. And when this case was solved, the evidence was destroyed. As a result, the investigators only had a few things left: shoes and some other items of clothing. They were handed over to the laboratory, and their experts made a surprising discovery. They saw a small speck on one shoe. After studying it, they determined that it was a drop of male semen that most likely belonged to Jodi's killer. Despite the fact that this tiny piece of evidence has been in storage for 36 years, experts have managed to extract a DNA profile of the alleged perpetrator. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the FBI database. This indicated that, at least in recent decades, the killer had not been prosecuted in serious cases. Investigators cross-checked this sample with the DNA profiles of several suspects, including Jodi's fiancé. They also interviewed a number of men who lived in the area at the time of the murder and asked them to provide their DNA samples. Unfortunately, all these efforts did not yield any result. The policemen did not get any coincidence. All the detectives had to do was hope that the unsub was in police custody and his DNA was in the system, but until then they simply had nothing to work with. Finally, they decided to try something else. The police participated in the creation of a deck of playing cards where each individual card contained information about various unsolved crimes that occurred in the district. Jodi's case was also on that list, and decks were distributed to local prisons. The investigators hoped that some of the prisoners might have heard of these cases from their cellmates. Killers often brag about what they've done without much fear of other criminals telling the police. However, they often exchange this information to shorten their own time or improve conditions of detention. Unfortunately, this step has not borne fruit, and the matter has once again come to a standstill. It was resumed only in 2018, when the development of DNA analysis gave investigators new unique opportunities. It was in that year that innovative technology called genetic genealogy was introduced. With its help, experts could find relatives with DNA. Thanks to this, police officers were given a unique opportunity to find suspects. In July 2018, detectives handed over a DNA sample from Jodi's killer to Parabon's private lab, and forensics began searching for his relatives. Successful application of this technology is possible only if one of the native owners of DNA is already in the genetic database. It may even be the furthest relative, so investigators often have to do a huge amount of work to get the killer. Eventually, experts from Parabon found the killer's second cousin, and the detectives, along with an expert in genealogy, began searching. They studied this cousin's lineage, looking for his relatives and screening out inappropriate people by sex, age, and other attributes. They wanted a man who lived near where the murder took place. After a grueling job, they finally tracked down the parents of the alleged killer. They lived just half an hour from where Jodi was found. But there was one problem. The couple had 6 sons. As soon as the detectives started digging into their biographies, they immediately spotted the prime suspect. He lived just 8 kilometers from the scene of the murder and was convicted 5 times for a violent crime, including children. However, he was always acquitted by the court and never received a serious punishment. His name was Terence Miller. In 1972, he was 30 years old. All his life he lived in the same place, and in 2018 continued to live there with his wife, with whom he was married for 43 years. Before that, the man was married 3 times, and each time the marriage ended in divorce. The first time he married at the age of 18, when his fiancée was only 14. In a few years they had 2 daughters. After that, the couple separated. With the next wife, he also had a daughter. And during the 3rd marriage, Miller had 2 more daughters. So the man had 5 children from 3 different women. Most of his life, he worked as a heavy machinery operator, and for his pension he and his fourth wife were selling ceramics. It seemed that this quiet pensioner was ill-suited to the role of a ruthless killer. However, the detectives were almost certain of his guilt. They had to follow the man for days to get a DNA sample. Investigators were trying to find something he could have left his biological material on to give to experts for comparison. And on August 28, they had the opportunity. Miller went to the casino and dumped a paper coffee cup in the trash. The detectives took it and gave it to the lab. Forensics found that the DNA on this glass is a perfect match to the semen found on Jody's shoe. This clearly confirmed the guilt of the man. The researchers began to prepare the case for trial. This process took several months, during which Miller was unaware that the mysteries of his past would soon become known to the world. 10 April 2019, a 77-year-old man was finally arrested on a charge of murder. The court granted him a $1 million bail, and on June 14, Miller was able to pay that amount. Turns out he was using a special company to bail out a non-refundable interest. The suspect spent $100,000 waiting for trial at his home, not in a prison cell. He was hung a tracking bracelet and restricted movement, allowing him to leave his home only for trips to the store and to the doctor. Jody's family was outraged by the fact that the court had allowed the killer to go home when he had already lived on the outside for 47 years. However, their claims did not affect the court's decision. The first hearing was initially set for the same year, but Miller's lawyers requested a continuance. The following year, they again requested a postponement of the hearing, as they allegedly did not have time to prepare because of the pandemic. By the end of 2020, they tried again to postpone the start of the trial, but this time their demands were rejected. Finally, the lawyers filed a petition to remove the DNA sample from the evidence list as they questioned the results of the examination. However, the court denied the request. Eventually, the trial began on October 26. Miller pleaded not guilty and refused to testify, having transferred all work to their lawyers. Constant adjournments of the sitting negatively affected the trial. The man who discovered Jody's body died a few months before the trial began. He recorded his testimony shortly before his death. Miller's lawyers took advantage of this fact and tried to accuse him of murder, arguing his position with several facts. First, this man initially gave the police several different reasons why he and his companion ended up in that wooded area. Initially, he claimed that they planned to practice shooting, so they decided to get as far away from the apartment buildings as possible. However, it was later revealed that the man was having an affair with his companion. At the time, he was hiding the fact from his wife. Second, he had a caliber gun, same as the bullet that killed Jody. At the time of the trial, his mistress was still alive but suffering from cancer. Despite this, she was able to come to the meeting and tell her version of the events. The woman said that they wanted to be alone in the woods that day. But we ran into Jody there. They tried to get her to the hospital, but they didn't have time. The woman denied that the lawyer was involved in the murder. The lawyers then began to challenge the DNA results, questioning the professionalism of the experts who had taken a sample from Jody's shoe. They also pointed out that when they looked at the shoes in the 70s, Sue didn't notice the spot. The prosecution considered all these arguments unfounded. The DNA analysis was carried out in accordance with all the rules. And the fact that there were traces of Miller's semen on the dead girl's shoes is indisputable. The suspect himself told the lawyers that he didn't know Jody and he never saw her. Because of this, the lawyers could not even assume that there was a consensual relationship between their clients and the victim. Remarkably, the shoes Jody was wearing that day belonged to her little sister. She took them without warning to get to the stables, and this moment slightly confused the participants of the court. It has been speculated that Miller's seed may have been on these shoes before the murder. However, this version also looked unlikely. The man did not know Sister Jody, who at that time was only 12 years old. On the judge, she confirmed that she had never seen him in his life. Therefore, this version was not considered seriously. The prosecution argued that Miller spotted Jody on a deserted road and threatened him with a gun in a wooded area. There, He raped the girl, killed her and fled shortly before a man and his mistress arrived. Despite the fact that the lawyers managed to sow doubts in the jury, Miller himself did not believe in victory. The prosecution included a recording of his telephone conversation with his wife while the man was still in custody. There he said he would go to prison, and there was no way out of it. He pointed out that there was his DNA in the file, and there was no way to challenge that evidence. Throughout the conversation, he never once declared his innocence, only repeated that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The trial ended on Friday, November 6, and the prestigious were given several days to make a decision. The judge gave them a break for the weekend, and they came back on Monday to discuss it. While they were in the courthouse, Miller's wife called the police and reported that her husband had settled his accounts with his life with a firearm. On bail, he had to hand over all the guns to the police, but the man left one gun. Miller died on the spot at the age of 78. However, the jury did not know. 3 hours later, they made a decision and were ready to voice it. However, Miller's lawyers demanded not to do so. In their opinion, after the death of the man, there was no point in issuing a verdict. However, the judge felt otherwise. He stated that Jodi's family had the right to know the verdict, and the jury had spoken. They found Miller guilty of murder. Unfortunately, the girl's parents did not wait for this moment. Her father died in 2005 and her mother in early 2019. Her younger sister thanked the court, the police, and the experts who had found Jodi's killer and followed it through. She admitted that her family had lost hope of ever knowing the truth over the years. However it happened, share your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to like it if you like it. I also recommend subscribing to our channel, where we often publish the most interesting criminal news from around the world. Thank you for watching,